I clocked in just before 7, Thursday morning, overcast, with that sticky kind of humidity that settles in your collar and doesn't let go. Rain must have passed through earlier, because everything downtown had that slick sheen. Sidewalks, windshields, even the air. District 6 sits a few blocks west of the stadium, tucked behind a row of aging bail bond offices and a liquor store that never opens before noon. The building's old, originally a firehouse, retrofitted into a precinct sometime after the war. Red brick, metal-framed windows, and a motor pool that always smells like wet concrete. The front lobby was dead quiet, except for the hum of the vending machine and the flicker of that same flickering ceiling panel we never got around to replacing. I signed in, past the empty reception desk, and made my way to the briefing room. Sanchez was already there, slouched in his chair, hands on his phone but not typing. He didn't look up when I walked in. His breakfast sandwich sat on a napkin, untouched, still steaming. I poured a cup of coffee. It tasted like someone had scraped the bottom of the pot with a rubber boot. Didn't matter. I sat 2 seats over. "Morning," I said. Nothing. Just a slow blink. Captain Durham came in late, unusual for him. Clipboard in hand, jaw tight. He dropped it on the podium with more force than necessary. The room quieted fast. "Listen up," he said. "We've got a spike in assault reports out west. Same neighborhood, 3 calls since 4 a.m. One involving a postal worker, one a nurse. Victims say attackers were..." He paused, acting unstable, biting, clawing, like something was really wrong. He scanned the room. No details yet, but whatever this is, it's spreading fast. That was it. No details. No urgency. Just one of those vague warnings you get used to in this job. Most of the guys mumbled and got up. I locked eyes with Sanchez, who still hadn't said a word. "You good, man?" I asked. He blinked slowly. "My cousin works at County ER. Said it's nuts over there. People coming in with bite wounds. But not from dogs. From people." I didn't say anything. What do you say to that? It sounded like bath salt nonsense from 10 years ago. Not our problem. Until it was. I grabbed my keys off the rack and headed to Unit 27. My usual patrol car. Crown Vic. No AC. I was supposed to check the west side perimeter, loop through Price Hill and Lower Liberty, then make a stop by the courthouse. It was still quiet. Too quiet. By 8:30, the calls started coming in. Dispatch was rattling off disturbance codes like popcorn. Screams heard from inside a laundromat. Blood on the windows of a dentist office. A gas station clerk locked in the cooler while a man tried to chew through the glass. None of it added up. I responded to a report of a man walking shirtless through traffic on Freeman Avenue. When I pulled up, he was already surrounded by 3 construction workers trying to hold him back. He didn't react to commands, didn't flinch at the taser. One of the workers grabbed a metal rod and struck him square in the ribs, and he didn't go down. I fired one shot. It went through his upper thigh. He dropped for a second, but then, impossibly, pushed himself back up. The wound bled, but not like it should have. No screaming, no sign of pain. He turned toward me with his mouth open, face smeared in red. And those eyes, vacant, wide, like something behind them had already left. The construction guys backed away fast. One yelled to hit him again. I ordered the man to stay down, weapon drawn, voice firm. He kept coming, slow, limping, but steady. Not a single flinch when I raised the pistol. I had no choice. I aimed center mass and fired twice more. Once into his chest, another through the upper shoulder. He staggered, dropped again. No blood mist. No final breath. Just a kind of twitching, like a puppet that had lost its strings. I approached cautiously, keeping the weapon trained. One of the construction guys had a pry bar in his hands and moved in beside me. The body was still twitching. Something inside me knew this wasn't normal. None of this was. We restrained the guy with a belt and a crowbar, pinning his arms down while we called it in. No one answered. Radio static. I tried central dispatch again. Nothing. The man on the ground was still breathing, mouth opening and closing, like a fish out of water, but his eyes weren't tracking. He didn't blink. His shirt was soaked, but his skin looked dry, pale, cold. EMS was already delayed. I tagged his wrist with a marker, took down the names of the witnesses, and relayed what I could over the MDT in the cruiser. The construction guys weren't sticking around. They knew something was off. I told them to head straight back to their site and lock the gates. I waited until backup finally responded. Unit 312, Maguire and Tran. They arrived 20 minutes later. The man on the ground hadn't moved since. Still breathing. Barely. They helped load him into the back of the cruiser with gloves and full PPE. Tran radioed County ER to expect a violent intake. We still thought this was a drug incident. A new kind of synthetic, maybe. That's what Maguire said as we taped the scene and cleared traffic. But I kept thinking about his eyes. That's when I decided to return to the station myself. Something wasn't right, and I needed to talk to someone in person. Back at District 6, the garage door was half open. 3 units had pulled in early. One officer from night shift was bleeding from the forearm. Another from Central had vomit on his vest. Someone had pushed one of the holding cells shut with a chair jammed through the handle. Inside, something was thudding against the reinforced glass. We weren't briefed. We weren't warned. There was no incident commander. It just happened. One by one, officers started trickling back in with confused, horrified looks. No one had clear orders. Radios went from loud to silent. At 10:12 a.m., we heard the first internal code yell. 6 Charlie 1 requesting immediate assist. Subject inside the back hall near the armory. He's... Then static. Captain Durham issued lockdown. Not an official citywide one, just our own. The kind you slap together because you don't know what's happening. He had the maintenance guy try to seal off the rear stairwell and posted Sanchez by the main entrance with a 12 gauge. By noon, it was a fortress, and we were trapped inside with it. The station had 3 floors, the basement with holding cells, evidence storage, and intake. The main level with dispatch, front desk, locker rooms, and briefing room. The second floor had interrogation and administrative offices. But now it all felt like one big coffin. From the hallway leading to the interview rooms, I heard a crash, then a scream. Not long. Just one of those sharp, last-breath type screams you never forget. Then came the sound of boots scrambling backward. One of the rookies, Powell, staggered out, mouth open, pale as chalk, blood on his shirt that wasn't his. Behind him came Officer Langston, or what used to be him. His jaw had been torn halfway loose. Skin around his neck was chewed raw. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just walked with that slow, mechanical gait, like someone whose brain had gone dark, but their legs never got the message. Sanchez fired, right into the chest. Langston didn't drop. Powell yelled to aim higher. The next shot cracked his temple open like a melon. That worked. We spent the next 10 minutes trying to decide what to do with the body. Nobody could look at it. Nobody could clean it up. Captain Durham dragged a tarp from the garage and covered it himself. That was the moment when I realized this wasn't going away. We were trained for shootings, protests, fentanyl ODs. Not this. Not people getting back up after being shot in the chest. Not co-workers turning into walking corpses. Not phones going dead citywide, or dispatch giving out busy signals. At 1:27 p.m., the power flickered, then dropped. The generator kicked in, but only lit the first floor and part of the basement. The cameras went dark. The radio repeater dropped out. We were blind and mostly deaf, and the sounds from holding were getting louder. We had 5 detainees locked up downstairs. One was a guy who'd been arrested that morning for attacking a paramedic. He hadn't said a word since they booked him, just stared at the corner of his cell, twitching. Now he was growling. I volunteered to check the basement. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want someone else to die down there. I took the hallway that ran behind the processing office and past the old vending machines. The emergency lighting buzzed overhead, a dull yellow that made everything look jaundiced. My boots echoed off the concrete. There wasn't any shouting, no clear signs of a riot, just that same low growling, almost like a large dog pacing in a kennel. As I approached the cell block door, I noticed something wrong with the floor. Wet, sticky, a crimson trail that led from the fingerprinting station down towards cell 4. My radio crackled in and out. Too much interference in the lower levels. I switched to channel 6, internal precinct, but got nothing but static. I reached for the keys clipped to my vest, unlocked the door slowly, and drew my sidearm. Inside, all 5 cells were closed, but not all 5 detainees were standing. One lay on the floor, curled against the back wall. Another stood with his head pressed against the bars, unmoving. The man in cell 3, the one who had bitten the medic, was now standing dead center in his cell, shirt torn, mouth foaming slightly. His eyes tracked me as soon as I stepped inside. "District Officer, identify," I said out loud. "Habit." He didn't respond. He twitched once, then again, a sudden jerking motion like something was pulling his muscles from the inside. I walked the row slowly. The man on the floor was dead. That much was clear. Grey skin, stiff arms, but no visible bite, no weapon. He wasn't supposed to be in there long, just a drunk tank hold. Now he looked like he'd been embalmed. I moved to the wall panel and checked the override switch. Cell controls were still active, but the security cams were down. I keyed in an internal code to lock the entry door behind me, just in case. The detainee in cell 3 began banging his head against the wall. Once, twice, again. No reaction to pain. Blood smeared down his temple and across the cement. I called upstairs for a med check and backup. No response, not even static. That's when the man in cell 4, the one standing silently, turned around. His lower jaw hung slack, dislocated, maybe broken. Teeth glistened wet, but the skin around them was pale and cracked like dried paint. His hands gripped the bars, and slowly he began to shake them. No words, just low guttural sounds from deep in the throat. I stepped back, pistol up. I couldn't process it. None of this made sense. Detainees didn't act like this. Not even during the worst meth rages. Not without sleep or food. Not like this. Suddenly, the man in cell 3 charged the bars full speed, smashing face first. A tooth flew past the bars and bounced on the tile. I took 2 steps back and watched him recoil, dazed, only to do it again. Blood painted the steel. That's when I saw it. His wrists. He had been chewing on them. There were bite marks up and down his forearms. Self-inflicted. I didn't stay to watch a third charge. I backed out to the hallway, locked the outer cell block door behind me, and hit the emergency lockdown toggle for the entire basement wing. A thick magnetic clang echoed through the concrete. If they got out, it wouldn't be on my watch. Back upstairs, the air was worse. Sweat, old coffee, and something else. Something like metal and rot. The holding hallway had 2 more officers posted now. Both were pale. One leaned against the wall with blood on his sleeve. Durham met me outside the processing office. He looked like he hadn't blinked in 10 minutes. His shirt was stained under the arms. He had a clipboard in one hand, and his other on his sidearm. 3 more calls came in, he said without looking at me. 2 paramedics were attacked mid-transport. 1 unit went dark near Walnut Hills. No response from Central Command. No radio, no dispatch. Nothing. I told him what I saw in the basement. I expected disbelief. What I got was a slow nod. He had already seen worse. "We're going to clear the 2nd floor," he said. "We had 2 plainclothes detectives up there earlier. They haven't come back down." I grabbed a Remington from the lockbox, loaded 6 shells, and followed him up the stairwell. The steps creaked. Lights were dim. At the top, the hallway looked like any other day, until you noticed the door to interview room B was splintered. There was a trail of blood on the floor, not smeared, dripped. A single trail that led into the office area. I followed Durham past the copy room and the water fountain. The back offices had glass windows with metal mesh inside. One had been cracked. A smear of blood curved down its side, like someone had fallen against it. Inside that room, I saw a boot, then a leg, then the rest. It was Detective Hensley, mid-50s, worked narcotics for over 20 years. Now he was slumped against the back filing cabinet, a pen jammed through his neck. The blood had dried black around it. Beside him was a woman, Detective Owens. She was breathing, barely. Her side had been torn open, but she was conscious. A belt was tied around her thigh. Her hands were trembling. She looked at me and said, "Don't let him wake up." Durham reached into his pocket, pulled out a syringe from the trauma kit. Morphine. I don't know where he got it. He gave her enough to stop the pain, not enough to make her sleep. We radioed for med evac. Nothing. Still no dispatch. Owens grabbed my collar and forced a whisper through her teeth. Hensley got bit, thought he could wait it out, locked us in here, said we could talk through it. I looked back at the body. Hensley's eyes were still open, but something about them had shifted. I knew that look now. That dead, glazed stare that didn't blink. We took Owens downstairs. She didn't want to be alone. She knew she was dying. She just didn't want to do it locked in a room again. By 3 p.m., the whole precinct was on emergency lockdown. The generator kept humming, but the cameras were all down, and the garage gate was frozen open. We had 24 officers inside, 4 injured, 2 confirmed dead. One of the officers on desk duty, Miller, started vomiting and shaking. He had been scratched, not bitten during an earlier call-out. Said it was nothing, but now his lips were blue and he couldn't stop twitching. We moved him to the records room and sealed it from the outside, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. An hour later, banging started from inside that room. The streets outside were silent. No sirens, no traffic. Smoke was rising from the west end. I saw it from the break room window. Pillars of dark smoke curling above the rooftops like something had collapsed or exploded. That was when our power cut again. This time, the generator didn't come back on. We lit lanterns from the emergency supply closet. We had no more backup, no outside help. Just 24 cops with dwindling ammo and one secure floor between them and what was becoming a building full of walking death. The hallways took on a different feeling in the lantern light. Corners seemed to stretch farther than they should. Shadows lingered where they hadn't before. The buzzing from the emergency lights above had stopped, leaving only the low thrum of people breathing too shallow, walking too quietly, and waiting for something to move that shouldn't. Captain Durham ordered everyone off non-essential posts. We consolidated the remaining personnel into the armory corridor and main hallway, places with clear sightlines and few entrances. Anyone injured was moved to interview rooms on the second floor, locked in with emergency latches. Owens was unconscious by then. Miller had stopped making noise altogether. We didn't open the doors to check. We didn't talk about them anymore either. Around 4:30 p.m., the silence broke. It started with a clang, metal on tile, followed by a scream. Officer Donnelly had gone upstairs to retrieve a box of trauma wraps and never came back. We heard the scream, then running footsteps, then nothing. Durham sent me and Officer Tran to check. We took the stairs slow. My flashlight beam cut through the dark like a blade. The upper hallway was empty, except for a few scattered paper files, like someone had tripped through a stack. We called out Donnelly's name twice. No reply. Near the admin offices, we saw blood trailing along the baseboards. Thick streaks, not a spray, dragged. I radioed in, but got no response. The unit repeater was failing again. We found Donnelly, or what was left of him, outside the old records archive. He was missing part of his neck. His sidearm was still holstered. No signs he'd even tried to draw it. Tran leaned down to check his vitals, but I stopped him. Donnelly's eyes were half open, just like Langston's had been. We backed out, quietly. That part of the station was lost now. Whatever got Donnelly might still be moving. That's when we heard a door creak behind us. It was room 2B, briefing room. The door had been locked since morning. Durham had ordered it sealed when reports started coming in, but someone had been inside. I raised the shotgun and moved in first. The hinges whined. Inside, the room was filled with stale air, that faint copper smell, blood, sweat, and panic. The chairs were knocked over. Donuts still sat in a box on the edge of the table. Someone had written names on the whiteboard, but only one was still visible, Kirby. In the corner, something shifted. We turned fast. Light caught on a figure curled behind the file cabinet. It was Officer Kirby, breathing fast, covered in blood. His hands were red to the elbows. He was shaking, rocking back and forth, whispering something over and over. Tran lowered his weapon and approached. I stayed back. Kirby looked up at him. "He bit me," he muttered. "I shot him, and he still bit me." His arm was bandaged with a torn sleeve, but I could already see the infection moving. The veins near the wound were dark. His skin was turning blotchy, almost grey. We backed out and locked the door from the outside. Not out of cruelty, not out of fear, just necessity. Back downstairs, Durham had started boarding up the front lobby windows. He'd pulled the steel shutter from the evidence cage and had officers reinforce the hallway barricades. We had 24 weapons, most of them sidearms, 3 shotguns, no rifles, no armor, no outside signal. It was starting to sink in. This wasn't temporary. No help was coming. Around 5:15 p.m., the banging started again from holding. Stronger, rhythmic. The heavy steel door that sealed the cell block hallway shook once, then again. I saw it bulge inward with each impact. We pulled every officer back into the main hall. Tran, Sanchez, Kwan, Bates, and me held the central line. Durham posted himself by the side stairwell. He didn't speak much after that, just stood with his arms folded, watching the door like it was going to breathe. The first breach came at 5:42 p.m., not from holding, from the garage. We heard the sound of something metallic snap, and then the grinding of steel. The overhead gate had failed and rolled halfway up. Then, something began crawling under it. At first just 1, then 3, then more. They weren't running. They weren't smart. But they didn't stop. One had half a uniform on, blue shirt, badge number still visible. Hensley. He'd made it back from upstairs somehow, but he wasn't him anymore. His jaw hung open, his fingers dragged across the tile as he walked. Behind him came 2 more figures, bloated, grey-skinned, mouth open, staggering like drunks but without hesitation. I fired first. Tran followed. The slugs knocked one to the ground, but the others kept moving until we hit the head. That was the rule. 1 shot wasn't enough. It had to be direct. Bates went down. One of the infected tackled him from the side, teeth into his shoulder before he could react. Sanchez pulled him away and emptied his sidearm into the attacker's face. Bates was screaming the whole time. We dragged him behind the evidence desk and pressed gauze into the wound, but we all knew it didn't matter. We knew what happened next. I offered to do it. Durham didn't answer. Bates did. He looked at me, nodded once, then looked away. After that, no one sat down. We spent the next hour fighting wave after wave. Some came through the garage, others from above. Something had broken the second-floor window and let a few climb down the inner stairwell. It became a siege. Every hallway was defended. Every room was barricaded. We moved in rotations. When one group fired, the other reloaded. When ammo ran out, we used fire axes. One officer, Kwan, used a fire extinguisher to blind 2 of them, then beat their skulls in with a crowbar. He didn't stop swinging until his arms gave out. We were no longer enforcing law. We weren't protecting and serving. We were surviving. By 7 p.m., we were down to 10. Only 10 officers still breathing. The rest were either turned, sealed in rooms, or dead on the floor. We retreated into the old narcotics storage vault. It had 1 steel door, no windows, and thick concrete walls. We brought what food we had, mostly vending snacks and stale coffee. 2 lanterns, 5 sidearms, a box of shells. The vault had no clocks. Time moved slow in the dark. The air felt heavy, like every breath we took added to the weight pressing down on us. One of the rookies, Miles, kept fiddling with the flashlight batteries, trying to stretch the charge. We didn't say it out loud, but everyone knew what we were waiting for. The next noise, the next impact. But it wasn't the vents that gave out. It wasn't the basement. It came from the front lobby. Glass shattered, loud, followed by banging on the front barricade and shouts. Real voices, human ones. I grabbed my weapon and bolted upright. So did Tran. Sanchez hesitated, then followed. Durham signaled for quiet. We moved together, 5 of us in total. One held the vault door, the rest pushed down the hallway with weapons raised, boots silent on the linoleum. When we reached the front lobby, the scene was chaos. The front roll-down shutter had been forced halfway up. Smoke drifted in from the street, and through the broken glass, 5 civilians had shoved themselves into the vestibule, screaming and banging on the locked inner doors. A woman in her 30s was holding a toddler in one arm and beating the glass with the butt of a flashlight. A man in a maintenance uniform had blood on his pants and was dragging another injured man by the collar. 2 more teens were behind them, looking back toward the street, shouting for us to hurry. Behind them were the infected, 6 at first, then more, figures staggering out from the smoke, drawn by the light, by the noise, by the smell of blood and sweat and panic. The woman screamed, "Let us in! They're right behind us!" Durham hesitated, his jaw clenched. Sanchez looked at him, then back at me. We all knew what this was. A risk. Letting anyone in could mean letting them in, but they were still alive. I hit the panel and unlocked the inner door. The woman burst in first, nearly falling over. The child was crying, face red and silent, that kind of shock sob that goes dry after too long. The others followed, dragging the injured man through just as the first of the infected slammed against the outer glass. We pushed a bench against the door, then a filing cabinet. Tran fired a single round through the shattered window. The infected dropped, but 3 more pressed in behind it. Durham yelled to fall back to the armory corridor. We moved fast, covering the civilians, weapons up. 2 more infected made it through the broken vestibule. 1 crawled over the counter. I fired point blank into its skull. It fell backward onto the tile, twitching. We cleared the lobby, sealed the door behind us. In the hallway, the woman was breathing hard, bent over her knees. The child clung to her leg without saying a word. The man in the blue jumpsuit was panting, holding a wrench with trembling hands. "We were on Elm," he said between breaths. "Delivery truck hit a fire hydrant. We went out to help. One of the guys looked off. Didn't say anything. Then more came out of the side street. Not walking right. Looked dead. They just kept coming," the woman added, voice hollow. "We ran. A cop told us to head to the precinct if we could. He didn't make it." We took them back to the vault. The room was already tight with the remaining officers, but we adjusted. Sanchez gave the child a granola bar from his pocket. No one had questions left. Just space. The injured man had a broken leg and a gash across his ribs. Durham checked the wound himself. No bites, no blood near the mouth, just lacerations. The group had made it through clean, but we couldn't stay in that room, not forever. We took turns on watch. I shared mine with Tran, standing near the hallway corner with the lantern dimmed. Every so often I'd hear movement above us. A vent creaking, a door shifting on old hinges. That's all it took to keep me awake. Sometime after midnight, the maintenance guy, his name was Kurt, offered to help us get the backup generator online. Said he'd done building systems in town for 15 years. We figured we had nothing to lose. Durham agreed. I went with him, along with Sanchez and a rookie named Owen. We took the back route down through records, past the break room, and down the stairwell to the basement generator bay. Everything smelled like damp concrete and burned rubber. The emergency lights were out completely, just our flashlights now. The generator itself was a diesel-fed backup rig, old but solid. Kurt moved like he knew what he was doing, checking the relays, tapping on the casing. Then he froze. There was something behind the stack of supply crates. Not a person. Not exactly. It moved slowly, crawling. One arm twisted under it, legs dragging behind like they'd been snapped at the hips, but the eyes were open and locked onto us. Sanchez didn't wait. He fired once, too early, missed. The shot ricocheted off the metal housing and hit the wall. I stepped up and finished it with a clean shot to the head. The sound echoed all through the basement. Kurt swore under his breath and started working faster. Said the battery was fried, but if we could find a fresh one, we might get auxiliary lighting on. We searched the adjacent room. Old supply lockers, junk electronics, evidence boxes from years ago. Owen cracked open a plastic tote and found a sealed marine battery, probably from some flood kit. Kurt nodded and set to work. 5 minutes later, the hallway lights blinked once, then held. A soft hum ran up through the floor, the faint whir of system fans. For the first time in hours, we weren't blind. We radioed upstairs. Durham answered on the second try. "Good work," he said. "Get back up here, now." His voice sounded different, tense. We made it halfway up the stairwell when we saw the shadow. Something moved across the top landing. Not fast, but deliberate. Sanchez raised his weapon first, flashlight beam tight on the railing. A foot appeared, dragging with a wet scrape. Then another. The figure leaned into view, an officer's uniform, bloodied, torn, the badge half ripped from the chest plate. The skin under the cap was pale grey, lips dark, eyes glassy and wide. It wasn't alone. Another followed, this one barefoot, moving with broken ankles that didn't stop its legs from stepping forward. The third hit the stairs hard, thudding like a sack of wet meat, then clawed its way back to its feet using the railing. "Back," I barked. "Back down, regroup." We descended fast, boots slamming the metal steps. I turned once and fired toward the lead figure's head, but missed. Too much movement, too close. Kurt stumbled and nearly fell, but Owen caught him. We reached the lower landing and cut left through the hallway leading toward the motor pool. That section of the precinct hadn't been used in years. It smelled of oil and rust, but it was dry and sealed. We slammed the maintenance door shut and braced it with a metal pipe from an old locker stand. I could already hear the infected dragging themselves down the steps behind us. The hallway had two exits, one that led to the rear alley gate and one back toward the holding cell corridor. Neither was safe. "Kurt," I said, out of breath. "Is there another way up? Old access?" He nodded, wiping sweat from his temple. "There's a crawl service ladder behind the boiler tanks. Leads to the old janitor's hall, back by the vending alcove." "Go. Take Owen. Get to the others. Tell Durham we're being flanked. We'll hold the rear." They didn't argue. They moved. Sanchez and I waited near the narrow hall that split the motor pool and the old supply cage. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The kind of silence you only get when two people know they're not coming out clean. The first walker appeared in the doorway, a woman in civilian clothes, jaw slack, eyes gone. Blood matted her shirt. She walked like her bones didn't fit anymore. I fired into her skull. She dropped without a sound. The next three didn't give us time to aim. They came clumsily but together. I took one out with a shot to the temple. Sanchez staggered backward after missing his second shot. He caught the third in the neck with the butt of his rifle, then stepped over the body, blood up to his wrists. "We can't hold this," he said through clenched teeth. "No, we can't." We fell back toward the boiler tanks, where Kurt had led Owen moments before. The crawlspace hatch was already open. I shoved Sanchez through first and followed, dragging the hatch shut behind us and locking it with a rusted bolt. The crawlspace was tight, just 4 feet high. Pipes hissed overhead. Dust filled the air. We followed the thin emergency light strips until we found the old janitor's corridor. It opened behind the vending alcove like Kurt had said. From there, we moved fast and quiet toward the vault. When we arrived, the door was sealed. A single knock code, 3 short, 1 long, and it opened. Durham pulled us inside and bolted it shut again. Inside, the group looked worse than when we left. The little girl was asleep, curled against her mother's lap. One of the teenagers had a deep scratch across his forearm. Nothing deep, but enough to raise suspicion. The others kept their distance from him, even his sister. Owen was pale. He sat against the wall, head back, eyes unfocused. I asked him what happened. He said nothing, just shook his head. Durham turned to me. The rest? I told him the truth. Not coming back. We took inventory. Less than 20 rounds of ammo. 2 good shotguns. 1 with a cracked stock. Food, gone. Water, half a jug from the supply crate. We were losing options fast. "We can't stay," I said. "They're already in the building. We wait here. We'll die here." "Streets aren't better," Durham replied. "We don't know how far this has spread. We don't even know if the bridges are open." Sanchez spoke up. "We head for the parking deck, northeast garage, 2 blocks east, still connected to the federal building. Might be guarded." Kurt nodded. "I've got the service codes for the gate. I worked that lot." We didn't vote. We moved. The plan was simple. Split into 2 groups. Durham would lead the civilians out through the crawl space to the alley. I'd lead the rest back through the second-floor hall to clear a route and pull any remaining infected away from the rear. We set out in silence. No flashlights. Just red glow chem sticks taped to our wrists. The upper floor was worse than we remembered. Paper files littered the floor. Blood smeared across doors. One hallway wall had claw marks. Long ones, like nails, or something sharper had torn through the plaster. I held back a reaction. We kept moving. At the break room, we found Owens, or what was left. She'd clawed her way out of interview 3. Door handle busted from the inside. Her body lay next to the vending machine, curled like she'd made it halfway before collapsing, still handcuffed, still wearing her badge. Sanchez moved to cover her face, but Durham stopped him. She's gone. Keep moving. We reached the upper hallway over the garage. The window had been broken from the outside. Glass rained inward. That's how some of them got in. Maybe from the rooftops. Maybe pulled by noise and movement. But something else caught my eye. A flare. Just one. Faint. Red. Coming from the rooftop across the alley. Someone else was out there. Durham stared for a long time, then turned back to us. Forget it. We're going to the garage. We can't save everyone. He was right. And still, it didn't feel right. We pushed down the main stairwell and cleared the north hallway. A single infected staggered out from behind the old file desk. I dropped it with 2 shots. A second came crawling out from the sally port. We stepped over it. Didn't look back. By the time we reached the alley, the others were already out. Kurt had the keypad open. The civilians were grouped against the wall, watching both directions. The girl was quiet. Her mother held her tighter than before. The alley smelled like diesel and rain-soaked trash. Steam curled up from an old sewer grate behind the precinct wall. There were no sirens, no helicopters, no backup. The only light came from a broken street lamp flickering over the edge of the far end, casting jumpy shadows on the bricks. Kurt pressed the code again. The alley gate clicked but didn't budge. Rust. Mechanical strain. It was an old steel drop bar, usually sealed from the inside. I handed him the crowbar we'd pried from the motorpool door. He jammed it into the gap and leaned in with both arms. I motioned Sanchez and Tran to help him while I covered the rear. The sound of metal grinding echoed louder than it should have. Too loud. Enough to pull attention from blocks away. I was already raising my weapon before I saw anything. One figure stepped into view near the end of the alley, then another, then 5 more. Shuffling, silent, but moving with certainty, like they'd been pulled by the vibration or the scent. "Move it," I said, low and sharp. "They're coming." Kurt cursed, twisted the bar. With a groan, the gate lifted just enough. He rolled under, then pulled from the outside. Durham pushed the civilians through one by one. The child went first, passed through the gap with a whimper. Her mother followed, crawling low, eyes wide, holding a kitchen knife like it meant something. The injured man had to be lifted. Sanchez and Tran carried him under, panting hard. Then the 2 teens. That left the rest of us. The infected were halfway down the alley now. One of them had half a face. One walked barefoot over broken glass without slowing. "Go," Durham said. "Cover from the other side." Sanchez ducked through next. Tran followed. Just me and Durham remained. I turned once more, lined up a clean shot, and dropped the first walker, then another. But they didn't stop. They rarely did. Durham looked at me, then down at the gate. "Don't wait," he said. "If I don't make it through, you seal it. Don't argue." I didn't answer, just nodded once. We moved together. He dropped one more. I hit another in the shoulder. Not enough. They were too close. He threw his shoulder into the gate to buy me time. I slid under first, grabbed the crowbar, pulled as hard as I could. Durham followed, ducking low. But something grabbed his leg. He kicked hard, fired once downward. The thing let go. Kurt and I grabbed his arms and yanked him through as the gate came crashing down behind us. His boot stayed on the other side. We didn't stop to look back. The streets were darker than I remembered. Empty cars blocked intersections. Smoke floated low over the pavement. We stuck to alleys, hugging the buildings. Twice we heard distant screaming, but it was muffled by glass and distance. The northeast parking garage came into view around the corner of 6th and Plum. Its ramp sat open. The barrier arm had been snapped in half. No lights, no guards, no patrol vehicles. We approached slow. Durham limped hard, blood soaking his sock. He waved off help. Kurt led the way into the lower level. The concrete interior was quiet, but not empty. A sedan had crashed into a pillar on the far side. Doors open. No driver. Just blood, and a single trail of footprints leading into the stairwell. No one spoke. We moved up to the second level. The woman with the child kept whispering to the girl to stay close. I saw the teen boy finally take his sister's hand again. She squeezed it like she was afraid to lose the only thing she had left. Near the top level, we found 2 parked city trucks with the keys still inside. Kurt hotwired the gate access panel and rolled one open. It creaked, but didn't draw attention. We set up a perimeter with cones and scrap metal, a makeshift barricade, just to catch breath. One of the infected had followed, or maybe several. We never knew how many. Then a groan echoed from the stairwell. "Positions," Durham said. No speeches, no last words, just tired hands gripping weapons. The first infected stepped onto the garage deck like a drunk searching for balance, arms slack at his sides, jaw hanging loose, shirt soaked in blood that wasn't his. A faint gurgle slipped out of his throat, barely a sound, more like breath brushing over something rotten. Then more came behind him. 3. No, 4. Their silhouettes moved like shadows under the garage's dim sodium lights, limbs crooked, faces slack but locked forward, drawn toward the noise, the heat, the scent of the living. I squeezed the trigger without thinking, the recoil kicking back into my shoulder as the first round struck the lead walker in the cheekbone and spun him backward. Sanchez fired beside me, his body locked in position, legs spread, eyes unblinking. Tran worked fast, feeding shells into his shotgun without raising his head, murmuring numbers under his breath like a prayer, or maybe a countdown. Durham dropped to one knee after his third shot. Not from panic. His leg had finally given out under him, the injury from the alley catching up. But he didn't quit. He gritted his teeth, braced against the asphalt, and fired again. The buckshot tore through one of the infected at close range, but 3 more kept coming through the stairwell, slow but unstoppable. Chaos bloomed around us. A teenage boy broke formation, ran toward the pickup, and one of the infected lunged from behind a row of cars. It caught the edge of the kid's jacket, enough to pull him down. He hit the pavement hard, but he twisted just in time, rolled free, and screamed something unintelligible. Before I could move, his sister's scream followed, a high, raw crack of panic. Their mother was already moving. She stepped in front of the girl and swung a rusted pipe with both hands. The blow connected with the infected's jaw, snapping it sideways with a crunch, but it wasn't enough. He staggered toward her again, arm raised. I fired over her shoulder, caught the walker between the eyes. It dropped like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Owen was next. He didn't scream, didn't get a shot off. One of the infected had been crawling, half crushed under a pile of debris, and lunged from below, grabbing his ankle and yanking him off balance. He hit the ground, and before any of us could reach him, it tore open the side of his neck. Blood sprayed the pavement. His eyes were still moving when we pulled him back, but he was already gone. We started retreating toward the trucks. The civilians were crying, ducked behind the first vehicle. Kurt jumped into the driver's seat of the larger city truck, fumbling with wires, his fingers shaking as he forced the ignition to life. The engine turned over with a desperate coughing roar that cut through the garage like a beacon. Sanchez was dry. He threw his shotgun down, drew the long screwdriver from his boot, and used it like a bayonet, driving it straight into one walker's temple as it got too close. I fired the last 3 rounds I had left. 2 landed, 1 missed, and I dropped the empty weapon without thinking. I grabbed the girl and her brother and shoved them into the back seat of the smaller truck. Their mother scrambled in behind them. I barely remember climbing into the truck bed. Just the slamming of doors, the shout from Durham as he fired his final shot, and the roar of tires on concrete. Somehow, we got out. We drove east, away from the garage, away from the precinct, away from everything that was already lost. The sky was still dark, but the horizon was beginning to pale. We passed the stadium, empty, cold. The digital signboard was frozen on a weather alert from the day before. We passed strip malls with their gates down, buses tilted sideways into medians, an ambulance turned on its side with no one inside. No military roadblocks, no CDC trucks, no sirens, just open streets, red lights stuck on endless cycle, and a silence that felt heavier than the gun in my lap. When we reached the bridge over the Ohio River, The early light caught the water and turned it metallic. We crossed without resistance. Just after dawn, we found a gas station that still had lights on, flickering battery lamps inside, candles in the window. 2 men stood guard with civilian rifles and tired eyes. No uniforms, no orders, just survivors. They didn't ask questions. Let us rest for a few hours behind the building, near a loading dock that still smelled of diesel. We wrapped wounds, shared what little food was left. No one spoke unless they had to. That was the first day. When I think back on it now, it doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like the world closed a door and never opened it again. I walked into District 6 at sunrise, thinking it was going to be another day of paperwork and patrols. By the next sunrise, my uniform was soaked in blood that wasn't mine. My sidearm was empty. My precinct, my home, was gone. We never got to send a final transmission. There was no last stand over the radio. No sign-off. No flag lowered. Just flickering lights, bodies in locked rooms, and smeared handprints on the walls. If anyone ever returns to that place, they won't understand what it was. Not really. They'll see the dried blood, the barricades, the notebooks frozen mid-sentence. But they won't understand the noise, the confusion, the dread of waiting for a handle to turn on the wrong side of the door. I remember every hallway, every name, every shot fired in that station. We didn't save the city. We didn't make a stand the world would remember. But for one full day, we didn't give up. We held the line, and I'm still here to remember it.